What's going on, everyone? And welcome to another episode of Writing Friction. And as always, today's guest is pretty cool. Everyone say hello to Tom DeSavia. How are you, Tom?
What's happening, man? Nice to meet you. I'm
Yeah,
doing
man.
well.
Chilling. I didn't catch. I was trying. I think is it a bikini kill shirt? I didn't catch it.
It is
Okay, I
actually.
saw the
Yeah,
bikini part.
yeah.
Haha.
It's from the. Yeah, I went to go see him. God, I mean, everything before COVID is sort of blurry. I think it was 2 years ago
Uh-huh.
when they did that. They did that reunion tour, and it was so badass. They were just great. Alice
Where
Mack
did you see
opened
them?
the Palladium. They played a few nights at the Hollywood Palladium, which is just it's a great place to go pre-COVID to just be like in under someone's armpit during a punk show. It was about, they were just fantastic. It was really good.
I
Biggest merch
Yeah.
line
Sorry.
I've ever
Continue.
seen. I was gonna say biggest merch line I've ever seen ever. Like
I
it's
well, two things there. One, what's the seating capacity of the Palladium? I've never been there.
good question. It's an old big band place. I mean, I'm guessing it's probably God, it's huge. It's got to be about 1,000.
Okay.
But it's an old literally big band place. So it was
Yeah.
like an orchestra dance hall sort of thing. And now there's a lot of DJ stuff and the occasional punk show. The replacements played there when they got back together.
Okay.
It's that kind of place. It's a very credible place, but you definitely it'll be interesting to see how this one works post COVID because you're just mashed up with
Yeah,
both.
no, most definitely. I mean, well, and then you also said the biggest merch line. One of the things I've done in my storied musical career at some point. I don't know. Do you know Great American Music Hall in San
Sure.
Francisco?
Yeah, absolutely.
I sold merch there. I mean, on and off between tours and my own shit, all the time. And I did 3 nights of the Growlers. They did a
Oh,
three
right on.
night run. This is probably 2015. I don't know if you know Alan Forbes, the poster artist. He's like the Black Crows logo. He's been around
Okay.
forever. He did the poster for that show, and I was sitting next to him. I was doing their merch. Great American, I think, is 1,100 people. Each night, that band, just in merchandise, each band that $15 to $17,000 a night.
Wow. That's
1,100 person capacity room. I mean, this line was longer than the line to get beer. It was longer than the line.
yeah.
I'd never seen anything like it.
This bikini kill show was the same thing. It was kids lined up from before the show. And so I was like, all right, let's wait till after. And then I got in line after and everything was $10.
Yeah.
So it was genius too. It was like the t-shirt was $10, the poster was $10. And so and there was just and it was funny actually by the time I got up there, they were completely out of my size on everything. So I have a buddy that sort of works with them. And I'm like, buy me a t-shirt.
Of
And
course.
he did it sort of because it was insane. It was great.
I mean, merchandise sales, I mean, it's such a huge part of bands' income. I mean, I was living in a van for years and we didn't make dick playing shows. You made all your money
Sure.
selling merch,
Sure.
especially shirts. But you mentioned the $10 thing that instantly reminds you of kind of what Kid Rock did. He was about a year, years ago, 5, 6, 8 years ago, something like that. He did a tour where everything was the same price. Like a beer
Yeah.
was $5, tickets were 20, like everything was the same. He took a huge chunk out of his own paycheck to do it.
It's so smart. And it's like, yeah, I mean, I get pissed when I go see a band and it's like, yeah, it's 125 for a hoodie, or it's like, come on. I mean, there's a way to I think there's a way to make a profit off that, and then there's a way to like, just when I was a kid, I couldn't afford it. Fucking $60 t-shirt. I feel bad for those kids.
Yeah.
Have
Well,
to pay that.
yeah. So let's start with you. I mean, it seems like you've been in the music game for a while, at least, in and around it. Where are you from originally? Or where are you now?
I'm in the San Fernando Valley part of
Okay,
Los
yeah.
Angeles, and I was born in the San Fernando Valley part of Los Angeles. So I'm
Yeah.
one of the 6 natives that exists. Yeah, I grew up out here. Um, just at the right time to dive into the punk rock thing as a little kid, and also like I grew up on the radio, so as my friends know, I love Linda Ronstadt records as much as I love X records.
Yeah.
So
So as a kid, were you playing music? Were you playing in bands? Were you doing any of that kind of stuff?
no, I like everyone. I played guitar as a kid, And I always knew I wasn't that good, and I
Uh,
didn't really have a desire to do it beyond like that. I thought kids that played instruments were cool, you know, and I kind of realized early on, like I just wasn't, you know, then I do think some people are just natural musicians, some people are natural cooks, some people are natural, you know, just actors, and you know, and you know, I probably could have learned, but I'm not at all disciplined. I'm the least disciplined person in the world, and I was never drawn to play it. I was always drawn to listen to it,
mhm.
and so I took guitar lessons, and I can play. I have a few guitars sitting around the house. I haven't picked one up probably in
Sure, yeah,
5 years,
yeah.
and I've never want to ever hear me play, and I'm just not that good, and it stresses me out. It's like the same thing with cooking. I can't cook.
I suck at cooking.
And yeah, I literally can't do it. And people, like, I know people that do it as sort of a stress release, and
Mhm.
nothing makes me more anxious.
Thousand
And I'll
percent.
fuck it up, and I'll fuck it up. And the same thing with playing. Whenever I, you know, would try to bang out like a simple little, you know, punk tune or a country tune, I'd be like, it just doesn't sound right, and I don't want
Mhm.
anyone to ever hear this. And so when I was a kid, but I've always been obsessed with records and music. And I remember the moment when I was a little kid. I was probably like 10, and I had all my records out. It was the only thing I've ever been organized with and sort of anal about. And I had them out on the floor, all sprawled out. And my dad walked by with one of his buddies, and the guy said to me, he was like, "Oh, you should get a job in the music business. You get free records if you work in the music business." And I just went, "Sold." And that was it. That was when I was like, "All right, somewhere there's people that get paid to do this." And I didn't know
Mhm.
how to, or you know, I didn't come from it in family, and but I was just sort of single-minded on it, and went like, all right, I want free records. And that was sort of
Well,
the motivation.
and growing, I mean, growing up in the San Fernando Valley, and again, I mean, you said like in the punk rock time, I'm gonna dial it down to let's say the late '70s. Correct me if I'm wrong.
Yeah, I mean, for me it was like mid 80s,
Okay,
early
yeah,
mid
most
80s when I
definitely.
got into it. Like I saw X for the first time in 82, when I was like 14, 15 years old, and it was
Is
just
that
like,
a thing where you grew up saying you saw X? Like,
oh yeah, that was then. I mean, there
yeah,
it's like, you know, the same thing. I wasn't ever into sports, meaning I didn't collect baseball cards, I didn't collect comic books, I didn't
yeah,
follow any teams. But you know, there was real, and there still is. I think I'm just too old to know it, but there was real regional pride back then. Who came from LA,
yeah,
and yeah, it didn't come cooler than X.
yeah.
Still
Well,
does.
and I the reason I mean I love years. You know, when people talk about LA, the LA to me will, you know, I live in SF, but I'm from Jersey, and you know
Right.
I've been to LA a bunch, but LA to me, and when people talk about them, I always think of Tom Petty driving cross country,
Yeah.
going into the phone booth, going into the you know the old school phone, you know, calling up the record labels, and a dude like you on the other end. My band used to fucking tour. We would tour LA. This how fucking desperate we were. We would tour LA. We would play, you know, like the Smell or something like that. And I would go like to Sony Records to War, and I would leave just CDs outside in the bushes and shit.
Right. Right.
Like 2012, you know. But you being the dude maybe on the other side of that door, how do you get into the business side of it? You know, what
I
up in
well,
LA was it an easy thing to do?
no, I mean, I didn't know what to do. I just knew that I didn't have any interest other than music, and I didn't go to college. I wasn't smart enough. Family didn't have money. You know, and I wasn't motivated by any. I didn't want to be anything. I wanted to somehow work in music, and I had a dad who was just amazing. And you know, his sort of credo was, you know, if you're going to be a garbage collector, be the best garbage collector you
Yeah.
can be, and just do what you want. Like, don't ever like not do what you like for a living. You know, just. And so he kind of put it in my head that you could, that, like, you know, I had my family was going to encourage me, and but I didn't know how to do it. My best friend from the time I was 13, who's still like my best friend from childhood, we're still amazing close, as and that was the other part of me, was a real guitar player, and he's a fantastic guitarist, everything from jazz to folk. He played with Nora Jones for a bunch of years, just a
Yeah.
wonderful, wonderful writer, but we grew up together, and I was watching him play guitar, and then, I'm going home and going, like, and he was just naturally, and is just still probably the best guitarist I've ever known. But his grandfather, when we were kids, his grandfather was a big composer, and he had written the music to the theme to Gilligan's Island,
Oh, wow.
and the music to the song "It's the Most Wonderful Time of the Year." And his name is George Weil, a great composer and songwriter who's long since passed. And my best friend is a guy named Adam Levy, and Adam was going to a guitar school or music school and was taking lessons with this woman who worked at a music magazine that I'd never heard of, a music trade magazine called Cashbox. And I was a billboard man, and she basically said, "Oh, we're looking for interns." And he was like, "My friend is dying to get in the business. He'll be your intern." And literally that's how it happened. And I went for a 1 day a week internship, and just kind of just kept going back every day, and was like, I wasn't getting paid. They were giving me lunch.
Yeah.
And I was like, "I'll clean the toilets, whatever you want me to
Lunch
do."
is a lot. I did an internship.
Oh yeah.
I did an internship at Electric Lady Studios, and I mean,
Oh, badass.
and I was going, but I was commuting in from Jersey, and I mean, they wouldn't even cleaning the toilets would have been nice. Yeah.
It was funny. It was a total, like, random, Hollywood moment that I don't know what happened anymore, because I wasn't going to school. I was just out of high school. I wasn't going to college. I wasn't. I was just working for free, and then I was there about. And I decided at that point what I wanted to do. I should back up. What I figured my role was, so I didn't really know what people in the music business did. I knew I didn't have any talent, and I wasn't really any good at anything. But I was like, okay, I can write. And I'd written for, like, school papers, and I'd written for, I was trying to freelance for the LA Weekly at the time. I think I got one story printed with them, and I liked writing, so I thought, working with this magazine, I'll be a music writer. And about 3 months in to this internship, and I got to know everyone, and I think, they were all really nice to me, and I think they were just like this, this geeky kid that is working for free and shows up every day. And I drove in like an hour to go to this place at the time.
And we don't have to pay them.
And yeah, we don't have to pay them. And they were all really nice to me. And so one day, it was really small staff. And one day the editor was walking around. It was just like this sort of classic scripted thing where he was just like, "Oh, Greg, my main writer is out sick." And it was a weekly magazine. He's like, "I don't know what I do. I got so much to write." And I was just like, "I'll do it, mister.
Yeah.
Give me something." He gave me he tossed me the towel basically and said, "All right, write, about this radio station in Des Moines, Iowa." I can't remember what it was, like something really bland. And I wrote it, and he was like, "Okay." And they gave me something else, and I was just so excited. So then they hired me, and I got hired into the company, working, helping them put together their charts, which I had no idea what to do. And then a couple months later, I kept writing. I got hired into the editorial department, and that's when I discovered I hated writing about music. And I just didn't like. I did it for, it was almost 3 years, and it was at the end of it I became, not because of talent or skills or anything like that, based on the fact this company paid really shitty wages, and as people were quitting, which was this very rapid like revolving door there, I kept getting bumped up. So all of a sudden I was like this 20-year-old editor of this magazine, and basically, just because I would still do it for my base salary, and it was a weekly, and I was getting burned out. And I didn't like being critical about music, to be honest. I didn't think it was, I could be critical in my private life of something, but I thought it was sort of shitty to go out and say, "Hey, that thing that really moves you, that music that really makes you weep and soundtracks your life, I don't like it. So I'm going to tell you."
And I'm going to write about it, and you're going to read about it. Now you're going to form your own opinion. Yeah.
It bummed me out. So I would never write bad reviews of people, and they would kind of bum out of me. I'm like, it's not, I mean, it'd be one thing if someone was, writing about, white supremacy, or if someone was writing about something really shitty to do with the human experience. But as someone writing about meeting a girl at a bar, it's like, it's not my place to tell them that's not what to do. So I didn't know what to do, and I was at this job, and I decided I want to be an A&R guy like every asshole, and didn't know how to do that. And
Again, another movie right there. Continue.
yeah, it's like, like everyone was like, I think I have good taste and
Uh-huh.
I can do this.
Can
And
you explain to people who are listening?
oh,
You
what
said
an
A and
art?
R.
Yeah,
Explain to that, please.
it stood for artisan repertoire at a record label or publisher. It now stands, I believe, for artisan research, but it was basically the person who either found and nurtured talent or worked with talent that existed at the company, or usually in my case both. Like I would sign people. I worked at a record company for a bunch of years. I worked at Elektra Records, and then I settled mostly in music publishing, which is my sort of preferred. I like working with songwriters who are often the band, but working as a publisher, you get to sort of work outside the lane of just making a record and putting it out and praying to God it does well, because a songwriter can write for film, a songwriter could write for someone else, a songwriter can write jingles, whatever. And I like the ability to not be reliant on, because basically when I was an A&R guy at a record label, I was working by the seat of my pants. I didn't sign stuff that did it, that busted the gates open. It usually did pretty critically well. And if something did well, it was almost by accident. It was almost like, hey, that thing's a hit. Who would have thunk?
Well, can we break, if you don't mind, can we break this down
Yeah,
even a little further?
sure.
The image in my mind and most people's mind who do know of an A&R guy, or anyone who's ever played in a band, is the guy or the girl who's in the back of the club, who's like sipping on a, probably, a non-alcoholic beverage. He's waiting for the show to finish, and the band is hoping that guy sees them and they sign them. Weezer
Yeah.
before anyone knew who Weezer
Right.
was.
Yeah.
That kind of thing. Am I off on that?
Just I was smoking cigarettes and drinking shots of whiskey, but yeah, the same thing. Yeah.
Again, can you give us more? Again, you named Elektra Records. Fish was assigned to Elektra.
Yeah.
What time frame is this?
I was there. I went to work there. I was there from 96 to 2001.
So that job, part of that job, and correct me if I'm wrong, was you were out at night, you were seeing bands, you were looking literally for bands to sign.
Yeah. And it was funny. It was in a time when music was not really the way I sort of look at it, like sort of every 7 years my tastes sort of matched the public's. And then
7 years is a thing in the universe. That's a big
I know. And I just sort of notice it's like every 7 years it sort of comes around, and I get that 1 year where I'm like, I get what's happening out there and I'm like into it. And then the rest of the time around, I'm usually working with those bands I signed in that time, or those artists I signed in that time. Or what I found I loved doing was I was working with people that I just adored. So like X, for example, when I went there, I mentioned earlier, like literally two of my favorite artists of all time are Linda Ronstadt and X. I mean, completely polar opposite, both Elektra artists. And at the time when I went there, there was a gig in between the writing gig and this. I worked at a company called ASCAP. And when I went to the record company, I said, I'd like to work on an X project and Linda Ronstadt stuff. And they were like, all right. And I thought I was being this shrewd negotiator and going like, I have one final, demand. And so I went there and I got to work with these two artists I love. And so I spent a lot of time doing that. So I certainly didn't sign either, but I got to work on records with them. And I signed a band called the Old 97s, who I've worked with through the years, and signed. I worked with them.
Remind me, what's the lead guy's name? Remind me.
Rhett Miller. Yep.
Yeah. So let me ask you another question. Does the relationship go further, or again, you're talking about a time when people were buying CDs, right? So it was a different buying public. It was a different public in general. Music played a different role in the public conscious in the late 90s than it does right now. That being said, these things were selling like fucking hotcakes if you were, the Backstreet Boys or whatever. Did your relationship with the artists go? I mean, were you in the studio with these people?
Oh yeah.
Yeah. I mean, what happens once the record goes out? Can you explain that?
Sure. I mean, there's two kinds of A&R. Well, there's probably several types of A&R people. There's two that I'll broadly define. and one is probably the only kind that should exist, is the cat who can grab the guitar and, you know, literally sit there and work out musical ideas with them, and you know, be sort of a Svengali in the studio. Um, I fell more into, or completely into, the category of every artist I've ever worked with, and to this day, I've never worked with anyone who wasn't already on the path and knew what they wanted to be. I
Got it.
never worked with anybody who needed to be defined. I worked with people who were very young. Like when I signed the 97s, you know, they were together maybe 4 or 5 years as a band. They'd put out a couple indies. They were very young and raw, but they were absolutely on their path. And so my job, whereas some A&R people get really into a deep, deep creative role of, you know, helping arrange songs, and, you know, mine was really just, it's been keeping artists and songwriters on the path they're already on, and trying to keep them from getting distracted, and trying to, you know, kind of, I've not been able to work. I haven't signed a lot either. I signed maybe a couple of things a year. And it's always, you know, it's sort of like, you know, it's falling in love. You meet someone, you're like, oh my God, I completely get you. And, you know, I think I still work with everyone I've ever signed, no matter what company, because you're sort of, you know, if it works right, you become part of their clan, you know, they become your
Yeah.
squad. And so, but yeah, so we'd go in, and like with the 97s, there would be like, you know, Rhett would, you know, give me 40 songs, and, you know, maybe I'd help him narrow it down to 20, and then he would narrow it down to 12.
Sure.
And, you know, you'd suggest producers, you know, I love matchmaking. You suggest, you know, musicians, if it's not a
You
band,
said
or even if it's a band.
matchmaking?
Yeah.
Uh,
Yeah. Matchmaking, like, so it's, you know, in a case of, you know, like either finding a producer that you think would also help them on this journey, or they need an additional musician. In the case of the 97s, I think any additional musician was someone they knew or they had worked with in their past. But like, I might work with a solo artist that, you know, needs a bass player, needs a string arrangement, and so
yeah.
you work on that. But I have to say, like, you know, I can't take any creative credit for anyone I've worked with, because they've all really had, you know, they've had to be musicians.
Yeah.
There hasn't been an option, you know, and they've known, they knew what road they were on. And so it was fun just to help them with that. And then when the record comes out, you know, you become their champion in the label, along with, you know, I was very lucky to be surrounded by really great people who were publicists and product managers and radio people, who really championed my bands and helped keep them on the label, even if they didn't break the bank. And it's really fun. I just, you know, it's the like I said, it not sound really corny about it, but I'm a fan of records, and so my favorite part was, and is going to the studio and watching it be created, you know. But
Mhm.
I'm not the guy who jumps in and goes, give me the guitar,
Of course.
this is what
Yeah.
you got to play, because yeah, it's not
You
my.
know, one of my favorite, you know, behind the music rock and roll moments of all time, specifically about talking about we're talking about, when Blind Melon signed with Capitol
Yeah.
Records. The famous story about they signed on the top of the Capitol Records
Right,
building.
right, yeah.
Brandon Hood was ass naked, his cock just flapping in the wind. You know, so it's like, you know, there was a time where this was the thing. But Rivers
Yeah.
Cuomo, I forget, and I brought up Weezer earlier because he talked about it, some interview or something. He talked about their process of getting signed. And how, again, they were LA band, they were playing the clubs, no one really knew who the fuck they were. And then they, you know, he talks about the A&R guy and how, you know, I think they eventually signed with Geffen, right?
Definitely, yeah,
And
yeah.
the Blue album came out with Geffen. Yeah, but I mean, who, you know, with these records popping, no one fucking know. I mean, I look at the Fleet Foxes. You know,
Right.
could you have predicted when that first record came out that the Fleet Foxes would be, you know, what could you write about the new Fleet Foxes record today?
Yeah, it's funny. I never knew, and I was like, you know, I'm really not doing good for my next job interview here, but I was never good at picking singles. I
Uh-huh.
never liked dealing with touring. I didn't like dealing with publicity.
Was touring part of your job
No,
responsibility?
but I mean, but like all the aspects that came out when a record happened, and but even like the artwork, when the artwork came, like I would be like, hey, someone would show me something, I'm like, that's cool. I'm like, that's cool. That's cool. I didn't care. I loved watching it come together, and I love my favorite thing, which I don't think it's a lost art. I think it's just sort of resting for a minute, but was sequencing. I loved sequencing the album.
The songs, you mean, on the record?
The songs, yeah. And
Correct.
like usually, did that almost, every time in collaboration with a band or watched a band do it and just
Uh,
loved the process. But I always loved like telling that story, like finding all the songs come together and having them sort of being like, all right, we got your next 45 minutes, we got your next half hour, and this is how it's going to go, and sort of soundtracking someone's experience through that, which
and
was
what was the politics of Elektra Records then? Were they owned by anyone, or what?
yeah, they were a Warner company,
Okay.
and it was right at the time when AOL bought us, so it was really weird. So we were owned by, we all got like, we all had AOL email kind of
Yeah, for
thing.
sure.
It was very strange, but it was like when you're saying it was funny. There was a lot more courtship happening and especially like bands and things like that, which was really fun. So with the 97s, they were all sports guys. So I remember we hooked them. We'd go to Dodger games, or they were huge hockey guys. So we'd
Yeah.
get them Dallas Stars tickets,
Yeah.
and I remember there was a bunch of labels after them at the time, and I really connected with these guys, and still am. They're just my brothers. And I remember we were having, everything was, it was like great dates. Everything was working out
Yeah.
like as planned. It's like the movie where they have the caper, and it goes well. And so I remember there was one point when we had gone and we'd taken to a Dodger game, and they were just excited to be at the Dodger game. And all of a sudden someone came up, and we worked it out with a buddy of ours, and they got to walk down to the field and
Oh, nice.
meet like Mike Piazza, and then they hand them all like Dodger caps, and
Oh, yeah.
we're smoking joints and listening to Metallica in the van and drinking beer, and it was like everything was perfect. And it was kind of one of those like, yeah, okay, this is going good. And then I remember there was another label, I can't remember what it was, who was like, okay, we got to do something like that. And they brought him to like a Laker game, I think. And then they had like really shitty like nosebleed tickets. And then they and our person went, wait, the thing's coming. These guys are now spoiled at this point and going like, well, this experience isn't as good as the last one. And the person goes like, points to the scoreboard and like, watch. And sure, it comes up, it's like, the Lakers welcome the old 97s, and then proceeds to spell like all their names wrong. And so they're calling me like from the van on the way home going like, you won. I was like, yes.
That's dope. Yeah. It
was like a 6-month courtship. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, the music world it's fascinating. Even if you could just be a fly on the wall, like the bands I played in, we never got to the theater level, but we were headlining the clubs around the country and things like that. But through that, I met some dope people. And when you meet dope people, you get into some pretty crazy situations. And when you go to the backstage of some of these venues around the world, there's some like hidden places and things. So I got a Warp Tour. This is like 2013. Right. And my buddy is the DJ for Riff Raff. Riff Raff's on Warp Tour. Okay. I don't know if you know Riff Raff. Yep. And he's like, text me that day. He's like, dude, we're playing Shoreline Amphitheater, Mountain View. He's like, come on down. He's like, I'll whatever, just hang out with me for the day. The only time I'd ever been to Warp Tour was like I saw MXPX, when I was a kid. Mm-hmm. Get there, hanging out on the bus, smoking weed, chilling out the whole day. Riff Raff sets at like 4:30. He brings me backstage at Shoreline, and backstage behind Shoreline, FYI, if you don't know, Shoreline Amphitheater from a bird's eye point of view is actually the Steely face from the Grateful Dead. Bill Graham built it.
I didn't know that, actually. Yes.
Yeah, Bill Graham built it that way. Yep. So of course there's going to be like hidden rooms. So there's a hidden weed smoking room in the back. It's like literally under a bridge behind a pillar. So we're back there, and all of a sudden my buddy's like, dude, Riff's going to come on. He's like, hang out backstage. All of a sudden we're hanging out. He's like, he calls me from the microphone. As you go from the DJ booth, as you go, and we're gonna have a fucking guy come out. And I'm like, what? Calls out my name. All of a sudden I'm in front of 10,000 people. I'm no one. I'm literally no one. I'm just a dude hanging out in the entourage. And they're like passing blunts around. I'm looking at, to me, I'm a musician. I'm like, I'm looking at 10,000. None of them are looking at me, but I'm looking at 10,000 people. I'm like, this will never happen again. I'm like, even if I don't play my own music, I'm here. I see it. Right. I'm on the stage.
Right on.
It's crazy. So where did this lead you then after the Elektra Records? You said 2001-ish?
2001. I then went back I was working at a place called ASCAP, which is
music
like
publishing.
Music publishing.
They send
essentially
me checks, right?
Yeah, exactly. They pay songwriters and publishers for when they're played on the radio, and I was running their creative department then. So it was back then. We do a lot of showcases. We do a lot of, and that was sort of how I got my A&R job. Is we'd champion bands or artists or writers and try to get them deals. And after a while, it was like I was getting enough stuff, I guess, on the boards that I started to get some offers to go do A&R. And then I worked at a label, and though I loved being in the studio and I loved, like, I got to work with some of my favorite artists, it was also much like the writing, the journalism, I should say, it was stressful because I knew I wasn't I wasn't the kind of guy who's could find hits. I always admired those people that could go out and like literally just find hits. I knew I'd find stuff I'd
Clive
like.
Davis obviously being probably the most famous, right?
Oh yeah, I mean, and I work with so many people who just like can really recognize like a trend and really recognize that something will sound good on the radio. And I, I lucked out a few times where I worked with things that sort of started to do well in those areas, but it was always, like I said, always kind of by accident. And so right at the time when I was talking about like that 7-year cycle, I was in there, and at that point, like everything that was happening was sort of like Limp Bizkit and Creed, and again, not to be critical, just stuff I didn't really understand.
Sure.
Stuff I remember one point my boss saying to me like, stop bringing me this alt country stuff. I need you to bring me the next Limp Bizkit. And I was like, fuck, I wouldn't have found Limp Bizkit. How am I supposed to find the next one? And
You weren't in Tallahassee, Florida, or
yeah,
Jacksonville. Where,
and it was like, I liked stuff. I was out there, but it wasn't really selling that well. So I started working more with like people that were already on the label and making records with them, and that was really a blast. And then, just quite honestly, after 6 years, they were kind of like, all right, that was a nice little experiment. And I was like, wow, what do I do now? And so this place ASCAP called me, and I went back there for a bunch of years, and I realized I loved working in publishing. And so since then, since 2008, 2009, I've been working in music publishing, and I've been really lucky to have a job all these years, and I love doing it. But with publishing, I get to work with a lot of different writers in a lot of different areas, and still it's all stuff I love. And though I want all their individual records to do well, I could have a successful writer as a publisher and not really have to worry about one record doing well.
of course,
A good sync, a co-write, a good something can really,
a song on Frozen.
boom, but it can, really make it a profitable deal for the company. And it lets me sort of, work in the areas of art that I understand and, am a fan of. So it's been.
So okay, well, two things. One, well, both specific to the music publishing world. It seemed like you worked through the Napster era. So I mean,
Yeah,
you
yeah,
probably saw. I mean,
yeah,
the pieces are still falling down from the sky.
yeah. Well, it's weird. And I was actually working with Metallica then, or specifically
Holy shit!
Lars.
Again,
Lars
so
at
you
the
said
time.
Metallica twice. I have to say it.
Right.
There's three bands off the top of my head that I feel like I'm just never gonna get a chance to see. I'm gonna fuck it up every time. Billy Joel, even though he
Right.
plays MSG every month. I never saw Neil Young, and I feel like I'm never gonna get to see him. And Metallica, I fucked up seeing Metallica, and they're an SF band.
Yeah, it's funny. I saw them and it was funny. I wasn't a Metallica fan. I didn't dislike them, but I liked sort of country rock and punk rock, and I was pretty limited, especially when I was a kid. And I was Metallica was sort of on a little bit of a break. It was right about the time they were filming that movie, Some Kind of Monster, that made about
Oh yeah,
great. And Lars had started a JV, a joint venture with Elektra called the Record Company, at his own label. And so they just said to me like, all right, you're going to be like the Elektra guy who deals with the A&R guy and the general manager of this label. So I became their sort of Elektra conduit. And so I was going to San Francisco a lot and hanging out with Lars, and it was really, really fun. And I remember this one time being out with him, and we were in New York with a band that he had just signed, and all getting pretty blasted.
yeah.
And I remember Lars turned to me and was like, you're pretty excited to be working with Metallica, you big Metallica fan? And I went like, I'm drunk, and I was like, yeah. And he's like, and he kind of looks at me, he's like, what's your favorite Metallica song? And I
Good, good.
panicked. I panicked and I went, Enter Sandman.
Of course, of course.
And he went, what's your second favorite Metallica song? And I panicked, and using, humor as a defense mechanism, which I've always done. I went, Sister Christian. And he stopped. And in that moment, I went, oh, fuck, I'm going to get fired. And he started laughing, and he went, tell me what you know about metal. And I was like, not much. I didn't know much about metal at the time. And I remember he was like, and he was like, well, like, yeah, what do you think of Merciful Fate? And I'm like, I don't know him. What do you think about Motorhead? I'm like, yeah, I know Ace of Spades. I was like, and so the next day or 2 days later, whenever I got back to LA, then again, this is like 97, 98.
Yeah.
I showed up, and there's a box on my desk about yay big with like 100 metal CDs in it. And he was like, here's your education. And that's how I sort of got into metal, was
Fucking
really,
that's great. That's dope.
and
Yeah.
so, but it was pretty fun. But I spent a lot of time in San Francisco then.
Yeah. Well,
really
he's spotted around. My buddy plays, he's playing before COVID, he was playing out. Lars is always out at the clubs. He's hanging out. He's usually with a good looking woman. And he's always out. I think his son's a musician too.
Right.
One time we were playing, and this is not Laura. I was playing, speaking of SF, a couple years ago, I was playing a blues jam, and fucking in walks completely wasted Trey Cool. And my buddy was running the jam, and he was the drummer also. And I'm playing, 12 bar blues scales. End up playing 4 songs with Trey Cool. He looks at me, he takes a selfie with me with his phone. That's dope though. Yeah, but it's cool. These dudes, even, Lars Ulrich has a 9-figure art collection, but the dude is still out there,
The nicest guy. And that's what, it's funny. I never really want to meet people I'm either really big fans of, or just because you don't always want to get disappointed. And someone like Lars was just larger than life, and it was right, like as you referenced, it was right as the Napster stuff was going on. So all of a sudden, he's being recognized by moms in the grocery store. He's everywhere at the time, and just you couldn't be a nicer, more generous, sweet guy. And I haven't seen him in years and years and years, but he was just the nicest guy. And he was right about everything he said about Napster at the time. He was right that, and the thing that, sort of killed him is everyone sort of turned on him saying, isn't Metallica have enough money? And that was really, stoked by the fires by the people that were making money off this, and decided that musicians could only cap out at a certain point. And it's like, fuck that. And his whole thing was like, they're gonna, make it so we don't get paid if we don't watch out. And now a stream on Spotify is worth 0.00003 cents because artists make enough money. Everyone thinks that if you're a musician, you got a jacuzzi on your bus. And so he really was ringing that warning bell. But it is, to your point, the business has completely shifted in the time I've been in it, from something that was based on physical material to something that's based on, streaming and syncing now.
Mm-hmm. So let's fast forward the clock a little bit then, with speaking within the music publishing world. Off the top of your head, what are, obviously the physical format has completely not been wiped out, but but we're a world of trends. So now you could buy vinyl records, and those are super popular. I go to Amoeba I live 2 blocks from Amoeba. I can go there, and they're selling vinyl left and right.
Vinyl's doing great, which I love. I look, I think the vinyl thing comes down to simply the experience. I think it comes down to 2 things. I think when you're a kid, showing off your record collection sort of defines who you are. Someone come in and see your CDs, see your stack, and I think vinyl does that in a way that people tend not to really want to. Let me see what's in your well, now there's not, now everything's streamed, so let me see what you've Shazammed lately. I don't think happens that much. And so it gives, I think, kids a way to set up their identity. When you walk in your room, you see a bunch of their vinyl sitting there and go like, okay, you're a goth, okay, you're a punk, okay, you're a metal kid, okay, you're a jam kid, okay, it helps define that. But more importantly, I think vinyl you know, and I'm sitting in a vinyl room now, so I'm
Yeah.
obviously I'm a vinyl collector, but it the experience, and I love both. I have everything in my house but a CD player, meaning I either stream music or I play vinyl. And when I stream, which I do a lot, like I'm not anti-stream, but when I stream, it tends to be background music as to whatever I'm doing. Friends over, I'm cleaning the house,
Sure.
I'm reading a book, I'm, usually cleaning, or I'm doing some, now that I'm home, I'm like, oh shit, I just feel like putting on music as background, which is essential to me. I need to have music on all the time. Whereas vinyl is, instead of like passive listening, it's really active listening. And when you put on vinyl, you're getting into the experience with them. You're getting into the movie they've created for you, the 45-minute experience, the 28-minute experience, whatever it is. And you're usually looking at an album cover. You're focused in, because in about 15 minutes that side's going to end, and you either got to flip it over or put something else on. And I think there's something about, for the 15 years prior, and I get it, the rock star was this thing was your phone, and it was more about the delivery system rather than the content. For me too, it was like, holy shit, this is a fork and it's a Bluetooth speaker, this is awesome. And then when that sort of wore off, and it's sort of the novelty of, and it was novelty that you could have a speaker and a pen, it came back to fidelity a bit, and people not wanting as compressed sounds, and but more so, I think, just the experience of, oh shit, you wrote a song, and you poured your life into it. I'm gonna dig into this, and and like anybody, like sometimes people are into listening to singles, and I do that too, and sometimes you just want to hear songs. And it's like I would say that it's like the YouTube thing, when the YouTube phenomenon ended, which is like, you didn't see The Simpsons, well, you just got to see this 2-minute scene, I'm going to send it to you. We still do that, and I still do that, but sometimes you want to watch the whole episode. And that's what I think albums do. I think sometimes you want to watch the whole movie, and when you do, and I think it's fucking beautiful that it's not a fad, that vinyls continue. It's not ever going to be the thing that finances the music business.
No, certainly not.
It's not ever going to be that, but it's the only part of the music business that's singly steadily increased for like the past 20 years.
Well, a couple things come to mind. Immediately, I mean, shed a little more light. A thing you hear a lot about is the 365 deal. But
Mm-hmm.
yet again, people don't, unless you have one, you don't really know what the mechanics behind it are.
Right.
Before you answer you're talking to a dude who's seen Fish over 100 times, right?
Yeah.
So when I see Fish, I buy the poster if I
Right.
can get it before it sells out. Fish gives me on my ticket stub a download code where after the show, 3 hours after the show, I can download a full soundboard mix of the entire show. So
Right.
bands are ever evolving to plea. We're talking at a time where people listening to this in the future, Kings of Leon just released what is the NFT? I don't
Right.
know if
Yep.
you're. So
Yep.
these things are happening so quickly.
Yeah.
How do you see it evolving? How did you see it evolve?
I don't. Well, it's funny. I was just having this conversation with someone yesterday. I'm totally like, I'm not one of these guys that's like, and it was better then.
Of course.
It's supposed to evolve. It's supposed to change.
We
We
had on
talk
Bob
about,
Lefsetz. We already talked about that. Don't worry.
yeah, but we people talk about the music business like it's been around since the beginning of time, like books have. Music is really a post World War II business that really came into its own in the 60s, 50s, and 60s. And and then at the time of the Beatles and the Stones, and later Sinatra, really became an album business, and fucking went through the roof in the 70s, in the Fleetwood Mac, Eagles, Linda Ronstadt,
Album oriented rock and roll.
yeah. And it became the reason the Beatles, the Beatles' entire recording career was 8 years. A lot of people don't know that. And a big part of that was there wasn't a lot of places they could play. So they wound up playing like, baseball stadiums. So a tour on an album would be, 10 dates, and then they'd go back and record another album. And the 70s really brought us the arena tour, the outdoor tour, the fish size touring.
Well, great. Let's use Grateful Dead.
Grateful Dead. Yeah, exactly. But it became this thing where it became a really profitable business. And, look, it's, people inherently, I don't think, like change. And when all of a sudden, when downloading was coming out, like I said, Lars was inherently, not inherently, he was 100% right that, like, you know, this is not good economically if this is what you do for a living. And he was absolutely right. He was absolutely should be credited for that. But and I was sort of, taking the stance of, like, it's illegal and you can't do that, with my hands on my hips. And I was right. The meaning, it was illegal. You couldn't illegally download. That was against the law, and it wasn't right to these poor musicians. And but the reality was that you couldn't put the genie back in the bottle once downloading happened. And people started to look, and what you were just saying about your fish experience, I think, is really important, because people started to look at, then the music business did, one of the most idiotic moves that any business could do. And they were like, how are we going to do this? We'll sue kids that are downloading music, effectively making it the most punk rock thing you could do.
Literally suing. I remember reading about. I mean, I'm
Oh,
maybe a little younger than you, but I remember reading about it.
so
Like,
stupid.
a girl in Arkansas was getting sued for, like,
Yeah,
$500,000. Yeah.
idiot. It made me want to download music. It was like, fuck you guys. And this is really awful. And then so people started to associate, you know, uh, all these record execs that, just look like Dick Cheney, that were just like, basically doomsday device, and that's the criminal part, because the ones that got, you know, music companies have had dips in profit.
Any business.
Musicians,
They're a business.
right? So they've had dips in profit over years. Musicians have had, because of this, have had, like, complete, like, inability to eat,
Yeah.
But when, like, all downloading started to happen, it was like, people were like, okay, music is now free. We're still willing to pay for books. We're still willing to pay for movies. We're still willing to pay to, go into a museum. Every other art form was still valid to pay for, but music suddenly became free. But what I've seen over the years is, when there is a direct fan connection, that people will support the art.
Definitely.
That people started to view music as being funneled through the most corporate, they weren't entirely wrong, the most corporate entity that could be. And what they didn't realize is, but that musician who doesn't have to, like, worry about how they're going to eat, can focus on their music if they're supported by an industry that supports them. And when downloading started, it just went crazy. The music business fucked up by suing music, suing fans. Fans rebelled by just exclusively, downloading, at the time, music, and obviously now streaming. And the people that got, like, everyone figured out how to profit off it, except the songwriter and the musicians, who were getting literally pittance on a, everyone's read the stories about how, Pharrell wound up making from streaming, like $10,000 or something like that, because it was like, what? It's just, it's really criminal.
And then it also literally flipped the whole business model upside down, where it used to be a band would tour to promote the record.
Mm-hmm.
Now a band just makes a record to go on tour, because now they need to go on tour to make money. They have to have an excuse to go on tour.
Yeah.
And it's just, and that's where the money is. I mean, again, a dude who'd been made my living for years, living in a fucking van,
Sure.
it's what it is. It's just, that's how you make money nowadays on the road. But again, and not to make it a fish thing, but any band can do this, where you're another example, Dr. Dog. I'm a
Mm-hmm.
huge Dr. Dog fan. I've been supporting that band since 2004 or whatever. I'm gonna go to every show, but they're a band where I think about this. It's the 1,000 fan rule, where you need 1,000 fans spending $100 a year on your product, right? That's $100,000 a year kind of
Yep.
thing. And that's very tangible, but bands now have to up it up another level. You got to be on Twitter. You got to be on fucking Instagram. You got to, I mean, Instagram wasn't around.
It's all it's all, look, one of humankind's biggest failings is, we all think that the moment we're all guilty of this. Literally, I think every human is guilty of this. We think the moment we're in is it.
Of course.
This is where it ends.
Yeah.
And that's why people go, like, okay. And I remember there was some president, I don't know if it was like Herbert Hoover or Rockefeller or something, that actually wanted to shut down the patent office. It was a famous story, because he was like, we got cars, we got electricity, we got running water and plumbing, like, shut down the patent office. There's nothing left to be invented. And so for music, I don't know what it's going to be. I have no fucking idea. There's, the kid's probably 8 right now that's going to, invent the next wave of what happens. I wouldn't have predicted downloading. I wouldn't have predicted streaming when I started off. I think it's awesome that it's evolving. And the problem is I'm not against the evolution of this. I'm against the business sort of fucking it up,
Yeah.
and that's the whole thing is like had the business just embraced Napster when it came out and said, all right, you guys can all do this. We're charging you $15 a pop for a subscription to it. I think every kid in the world would have paid $15 a month to like have unlimited streaming to everything they wanted, not just have to search for
You
torrents. And
really could have really put that genie or helped that genie in the bottle kind of situation back then.
instead, some idiot went, let's sue that girl. She downloaded a fish tune.
Yeah.
Let's sue her and make a point of her. And so, it's supposed to keep evolving, and and it will, and there will be something different. And I have no idea what it is. I just keep holding on by the seat of my pants, and I just rely on the fact that, like, all right, I think I know songs, I think I know musicians and writers, and they, so I deal with them, and they're always going to create, and the mode that it goes out to people will be something completely different, and and every time, the one thing I will say, like, everything that's proved revolutionary in the time I've been in the business, be it, YouTube, be it, a Napster idea, anything like that, has no one's known. It's just all of a sudden it's like, holy shit, some band did something and it worked. Let's all jump on that. Like I would say that same thing with bands, like, any band that's become, era defining, be it Nirvana, No Doubt. I'm trying to think of any, Adele. Now the music business sits back and pats itself on the back and goes, yeah, we did that. It's like, no, you didn't. There's always been like great managers, great marketing people, great people in these companies, but it's usually like catches everyone by surprise, when something really takes off. Like, the Nirvana thing was building and building and building and building. And I remember, loving that when that was happening, watching it happen. But what the music business is good at is pouring gasoline on a fire that's already going. And that's what happened. These kids went, fuck yeah, this is our punk rock reaction to what's happening right now. And here's this tremendous songwriter and this tremendous band who sounds like nothing else we're hearing. And the music business went like, oh shit, we're gonna pour gas on that fire and make that fire bigger and bigger and bigger. But I don't think anybody thought it was going to be as big. Well, let me rephrase that. There were individuals that thought it was going to be that big, but corporations aren't people. No fucking corporations thought it was going to be that big.
I mean, Nirvana is one of those things that, again, that was before my time, but obviously I'm a huge fan of the band. To think that could ever happen again, I don't know. Well, in the sense of just,
I've heard people say, I remember at one point, like,
I hope it does. Yeah.
I remember people like talking to a friend of mine who was like, oh God, superhero movies played themselves out, like after the Nolan Batmans. It was like, because they started doing them, they stopped selling them, like, oh, those are done, and then they become massive. And people say slasher films are done, and then all of a sudden someone makes a big slasher film.
No, maybe I'm not. Maybe what I'm saying is no. I think what I'm saying more about it, not as an art form of rock and roll. It will always be there. I think of just the right place, the right fucking time. You see, the buzz was building. It was just, man, Nirvana. And nowadays, it's like if you're not the first record a hit off the gate, it's like you're a fucking failure. Are bands even allowed to develop anymore? I don't know. On the major record label side, I'm not sure how that development works.
This was the thing. I mean, this is the thing. We all, and I'm talking when I say we, I'm talking about me and this sort of this. We all have selective memory. Like, I look back at the '90s, and I'm just like, oh God, it was perfect then. And then a friend of mine around me was like, no, we were as miserable as we are now. We're like, can you believe this band got signed? Or can you believe this band became big? And there's no good music anymore. And you always cry about that. You always, that's why I mean, it's like we think the moment we're in is it. And it's always proved wrong. And there's always, I truly believe like great art will always exist. The problem is there's certain times where the business catches up with it and you have something that happened. I mean, one of the stories that you'll relate to, when I was at Elektra and Fish were on the label, and they wanted to drop the band because they'd never sold a lot of records.
None.
And they were, I can't remember the records that were coming out then. You probably remember, but you'll probably know about this event. But they were doing, I think,
Hoist.
Fish Fest.
Yeah. Not, yeah.
And
Well,
they
can
were
you give
doing
me a
it
year? If you give me a year, I'll
it
nail
was
it.
probably, this was probably like 97, 96,
Yeah, so they were doing by that time they were able to draw 90,000 people for a 3-day festival in the woods of Maine.
and I remember they were doing a thing. It was at the Woodstock grounds, I
It was
believe.
either Lemon Wheel or the Great Went.
Yeah, and so they went, and there was like 3 days of just sold. And I remember our company was completely taken by surprise. Like they were like, but this band doesn't
Really?
sell. Absolutely. And I remember the a bunch of people from the company taking a helicopter there and just seeing that view of the fans. And then the next day, Fish became a priority for the label.
No shit.
They had no, and like I said, there were individuals there
Sure,
who
yeah.
the band, you know, A&R people, marketing people who knew how big it was, but as a corporation, they were looking at these ledgers and like, this band's selling like 100,000 records,
If
150,000
that.
records, yeah, if that, which then was a complete, you know, disaster. That was a failure of a sales figure.
Totally.
And then they were all of a sudden like, oh shit. And that's what I mean. It was like the public made this band big. And that could certainly happen again. It's like now the problem is we're more distracted by a lot of other things.
Of course.
You know, now you've got so much coming at you at all moments that it's hard to where then there weren't that many records coming out. Now anybody that has a Mac, for better or worse, can make an album.
Of course.
You know, back then you needed to, like, only certain people could make a record that could afford to go into a studio. And so that's the one thing that, like, you know, I'm not necessarily the like, awesome, everyone can do this, because everyone does, and everyone sort of clogs up the airwaves and becomes a lot of white noise. But yeah, that was a one. Absolutely, no one. The corporation didn't know Fish were as big as they were until they found out.
Yeah, I mean, people get pissed off when I talk Fish on the podcast. But yeah, Fish. I mean, at that point, they were selling at MSG 4 nights in a row. I mean, again, Fish is a phenomenon. I don't know if we're ever going to see a band like Fish ever again. I don't know if to that scale. I mean, it's just so grand. It's crazy. It's just crazy. Life is crazy. Where do you see it all going? I mean, you have any predictions? What are your future thoughts?
I don't have any predictions, because
Live music will come back. We'll be back in clubs.
Oh yeah, no, live music will come back. I don't, but as far as, I mean, just what I was saying earlier, my only prediction is music's never failed me, and it's never failed us. And though, yeah, there may be a lot less things happening now because there's a lot more things asking for our money. You know, I mean, video games certainly haven't dipped at all. They've only gotten bigger and bigger and bigger.
Again, another great revenue for songwriters and for composers.
Absolutely.
Video game, for sure.
Absolutely. Are you kidding? No, and it's like, but I'm just a firm believer. I've yet to be proved wrong that, you know, I mean, Adele was the fastest selling 10 million record in history. It hit 10 million records.
Oh, is that true? I didn't know that. Okay.
Yeah. And that was when things were bad. You know, that was, you know, in the early 2000s. And when something comes and resonates with people, it resonates. And I think you know, the idea of, like I said, when Nirvana happened, we didn't know we were waiting for Nirvana. Nirvana just came along. When, you know, Adele happened, we didn't know we were waiting for Adele. Adele just happened. And there's reasons that things resonate. And I have absolute, like, belief it's music. It's like, it will always exist, and there'll always be someone who does something better. And I love, even when I don't necessarily understand what's happening, I fucking love it, because people didn't understand punk rock when I like that. And it's not all made for me. It's all not made for you. It's all not made for, and so you get to a point where we don't necessarily understand what's happening. And I think that's fucking awesome. We're not supposed to.
Without a doubt. And when you pull the camera back, music is an art form, and art forms go through ebbs and flows of popular awareness. You know, I mean, I'm sure when, you know, Pollock was painting, they were probably like, oh, this has been done before. You know, we already have, you know, Michelangelo, you know, and when Rothko was doing it, I mean, there's always going to be
Basquiat. Like, you know, I mean, look at what an influence that became, but it was just like, that was not conventional art to someone who looked down their nose at it, you know. But yeah,
Yeah. Tom, this has been an absolute blast, and
Yeah,
I'm sure we
thank
could
you, man.
talk for
Okay, well,
hours. I always ask kind of two quick questions at the
yeah.
end. Well, we didn't even talk about writing, but you are a writer, and you're an LA dude.
Our book
What
comes
you
out in paperback in June. That'll be my plug. Our second book comes out in June in paperback, so it's
good? And
little.
then you answer the question: where do or what bookstores you like to rep? You an LA guy? Any spots you like,
Oh
or even
yeah,
record stores?
yeah. Oh, both. Bookstores. I love Book Soup, which is out there in Hollywood, across from the old Tower Records. There's a used bookstore called the Iliad that I love a whole lot. And there's just, I mean, San Francisco. I mean, you got City Lights, which is just the greatest bookstore in the
What
world.
did they do with the old Tower Records? Because there's an old Tower Records in SF, and I think they turned it into a gym.
Yeah, it's painted back to the old. It's got the tower sign on it. Gibson bought the building,
Oh, sweet.
and then I heard sold the building. So it's still painted like Tower Records, but it's vacant. It's still vacant. I hope someone opens a record store. And as far as record stores, I mean, Los Angeles Freak Beat, Indianapolis Luna, Good Records in Dallas, 1, 2, 3, 4 in Oakland, which is just a fucking badass store in
And
Oakland.
they got a spot in the Mission in SF too.
1, 2, 3, 4.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, I didn't know that. I've been
Yeah,
to
on
the
Valencia
book
Street.
event at the one, and I do all my record shopping online. I order from all of them, but I love.
Again, Green Day. People love even if people don't like their music, people in the Bay Area love Green Day because
Oh,
those dudes are always repping the Bay. They're fucking pumping money into it. They're playing like Billy Joe. You know, they'll tweet and they'll be playing a club show in Oakland at like midnight. You know, wearing masks and shit. And you know, they're the shit. I love Green
yeah.
Day.
I'm a fan. I'm a fan of those guys.
Yeah, and most definitely. And you're obviously we linked up through Instagram, social media, all that shit. What where are people gonna find you? How can they get in touch?
Oh, it's at DeSavia, and then I did have at DeSavia's Twitter too, and then during the whole Trump mess, I couldn't stand Twitter and just to hear his writing, so I got off Twitter. So then someone stole my name, so now I'm T DeSavia
Okay.
on Twitter. So they stole my thing, but I'm usually at DeSavia Clubhouse, wherever I could get that. And luckily, I have an uncommon name, so I just use my last name everywhere.
Most definitely. Well, maybe we'll catch a show at the Palladium one time, Tom.
I like that, man.
Dude, love it, man. Absolutely. Enjoy the rest of your night, dude.
Good to meet you, brother.
Take care, man.